But
Yeah.
in a modern economy, as we look at serving the public purpose, there's a lot more that the expansiveness of a fiat currency allows for. For example, Medicare-for-All, cradle to grave, free college for all, or student loan forgiveness.
Yeah.
I look at these things, and Warren, I talked to you about this on the phone the other day.
Yeah.
I literally wake up in the morning, and every second I feel like I'm not talking about this, I feel like I'm letting someone die. I know it sounds hyperbolic.
Okay, so
I mean,
let's look at why we can do those things. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we couldn't do that. We needed 99% of the people to be growing the food, or we'd starve to death. If they were doctors and teachers and everything else, then we'd be starving because you needed people in the fields to grow the food. But through productivity today, 1% of the workforce today grows all the food, and it's like 8,000 calories a day per person, and we're exporting, huge amounts of food. Okay, so now we've got those 99% that can do other things. Well, then we needed everybody in manufacturing. Well, today, 7% of the workforce is in manufacturing. And if you ever got it to 8%, these rooms we're sitting in would be filled to the ceiling with junk, and we couldn't even talk to each other. Okay, so now we've got 90%, well, 92%, whatever, is in the service sector. Okay, it's a service economy, and that is discretionary to a large extent. There are all kinds of things that can be done with that 90%, and we can have medical services for everybody because we have those resources available. Okay, and we can have universities for everybody. The trade-offs aren't there until you've used up your productive capacity. We're not anywhere near there right now, and what we've got is public policy that doesn't understand the source of the price level, doesn't understand the monetary system, and feels compelled to keep at least 10% of people who would otherwise be working from working and being productive. And the real losses by not having everybody who wants to work able to work and be productive, those real losses are larger in just a couple of years than all the losses from all the wars in the history of the world combined. I mean, the lost output from the real output, and I'm talking about services now, is staggering, okay, from this. And so that's the core of what you're talking about, that this stuff is there to be had if you want it. It's not a free lunch. It's going to be worked for. Okay, you don't get medical services for free. Somebody has to go and do it. Okay, and so, so the idea is you want to make sure that the monetary system, as it's set up, accomplishes all that. So the other contribution that MMT makes to the history of thought is, like, what is the cause of unemployment? Why are we operating at this? Okay, and we're the only ones who recognize that the cause of unemployment is taxation. In fact, the whole point of taxation is to create unemployment. And unemployment is defined as people looking for paid work in the United States, people looking to work for dollars. And no one would be willing to work for dollars if there weren't any dollars. And the dollar is created with the tax liability. So if you go into places where there isn't any monetary system, or pre-monetary system, where there's no taxation, no state, you don't have unemployment like we know it, as we define it. If you looked at the American Indians living in Indian tribes, they didn't have unemployment. There was no such thing. Okay, they didn't have, if they were out hunting and somebody came up with a better way to hunt and they needed fewer people to hunt, they didn't suddenly have people sitting around. There was always more to do than there was people to do it, just like there is today. And the monetary system never got in the way of that.
You bring up, and
yeah.
I think we need to kind of close the loop on one thing real quickly.
I was going to go back to Pompeii to close the loop for you.
Well, don't you use Pompeii for the final, but on this particular thing, Pavlina talks about this, Stephanie Kelton talks about this, the whole gang talks about this. We've got the robots are coming. The robots are coming. The robots are coming. Let's just squash that bug, man. This is, bottom line is bring the robots, please.
Yeah, well, it's the robots that have got us down from 99% being farmers to 1%, from 80% manufacturing to 7%. That's the productivity. That's the robots. And if we can bring that down from, it's under 10% now. If we can bring it down to 1%, even better. The more we can bring that down, the better, because that frees us up to do all these other things. Okay, so let's see. where did I leave off to tie back? I was going to bring it back to
Pompeii.
Yeah, to Pompeii, but
I'm so you had talked about how the productive capacity.
Yeah, right. So in Pompeii, why did they levy the tax? Okay, they had these coins in a box that they figured out we can make all the coins we want. They were just cheap coins. It'd be nice to get people to work for these coins, but they're not going to do it. Nobody cares about these coins. Nobody is unemployed in Pompeii, okay, at that point. There's no unemployed. There's nobody looking for paid work in that particular coin. So what do? They levy a tax. They say every homeowner has to pay a tax of 10 coins a month or 5 coins a month. Now, the city is monetized. Now they need the coin. Now they are unemployed. Now there are people looking for paid work because there's a debit on the economy side of the ledger. They need this to pay the tax or they're going to lose their house, right? And so now they show up for work. Now maybe 1,000 people show up for work out of 20,000 population to the government looking for these coins. And now the government can hire these people that they wanted, that their tax caused them to be unemployed, to look for work, and now they can hire them with their otherwise worthless coins. Okay, well, let's say they don't want 1,000. Maybe they only wanted 500. Like, what do? Hire 500 and let the other people be unemployed, not be able to pay the tax and get their house burned down, or sold? No. Why would they do that? They would realize, gee, our tax was too large. Our tax created 500 unemployed, and we only wanted 1,000 unemployed, and we only wanted to hire 500. We made a mistake. We'll lower the tax. And in the meantime, we'll employ all 1,000, but we'll lower the tax because we know that next year we're not going to get 1,000. We're only going to get 500. Okay, now they feel obligated to hire the people because it's their tax created the unemployment. They know why they're there, because they need to pay the house tax and people needed to net save. That's why they're there. And so they say, all right, we'll take the 1,000, but we don't want that many, so we're going to lower the tax until it gets down to the level we want. Well, that's what I call the transition job, right? Or the job guarantee, it used to be called, or the ELR or whatever. Look, the reason the unemployed are there is because the tax created them to be there. Obviously, for this size government, the tax is way too high. So what do? Well, you either increase the size of the government by offering more public services and hiring those people until the unemployment goes away, which could be medical, it could be free education, it could be any of these things. Or you lower the tax if you don't think that public purpose is served by free medical and free education, you lower the tax until these people go away. Now, for myself, I would do a combination of both. I think, by my back of the envelope computations, we can have, Medicare-for-All. We can have public universities not charge, okay, and we can have, other ways to avoid moral hazard, if there is such a thing. But we can have $2,000 a month minimum Social Security, and we can still eliminate the most regressive punishing tax we have, which is the FICA tax, the payroll tax. So we can do a little bit of both. And I think that after we do that, and we can have a transition job for anybody willing and able to work to help them transition from unemployment to the private sector employment. Okay, and so we're adequately provisioning the public sector with Medicare-for-All, with free universities. We are reducing the regressive payroll tax, and we're helping the remaining unemployed transition from the unemployment to the private sector through a transition job. And what if I'm wrong? What if that turns out to be too hot of an economy and it starts driving up the price level? Well, then we can adjust it and cut back. But nobody's going to die in the streets because of that. Now, the other thing I want to say about Medicare-for-All, which we tried to get through to Bernie Sanders, but without success, obviously, is I see it as a highly deflationary event. So right now I see, I'll just use very, very round numbers, but $3 trillion spent on healthcare. Out of that, $1 trillion in the private sector is private sector administration. That's pretty much going to go away if we go Medicare-for-All. But what does that mean if that spending goes away? Well, all those were all salaries going to, people who were like digging one hole and filling in another, which is what private sector, compared with. Well, let's just say they were doing all the administration work. I'm not saying what they were doing wasn't valuable in its context, but the context had no value. But anyway, you had $1 trillion worth of wages and salaries going to people doing administration that aren't going to be there anymore. That's a highly deflationary event. All those people are going to be out of work in the unemployment lines looking for jobs. You don't raise taxes in that context. That makes no sense at all. You'd want to lower taxes or increase public spending somewhere else in that context. Now, yes, there will be other people spending more money to make up for it. Corporations will have lower healthcare costs, so they may be spending more on something else. People may be getting higher salaries. People will be, have lower healthcare costs. There won't be any healthcare premiums if it's Medicare-for-All, very little. Maybe you get a little bit of Part B or something. But and so there will be some inflationary biases, but I think the deflationary bias, at least initially, will dominate. So there's absolutely no reason to pay for Medicare-for-All with a tax increase like the Sanders campaign was putting out there. And it was a horrible tax. It was a regressive, punishing tax, even though it was supposedly on higher incomes. And the whole thing was, would have been led to, I think, 15 or 20% unemployment. I was like just categorically against that, raising taxes into a. And now that I'm thinking back on the taxes, they attempted it to be progressive, so I give them credit for that. But it would have wound up increasing unemployment, which is always a regressive phenomenon, dramatically. And it didn't have to be. And think of how much stronger the campaign would have been explaining it. Look, this is a deflationary event. You don't raise taxes for that. You don't pay for it that way. Okay. And you say, well, what about the deficit? You say, look, the public debt are the dollars spent by government that haven't yet been used to pay taxes. They sit in accounts at the Fed called Treasury securities. What's the problem? While in the year 2030, the CBO reports the deficit's going to be $77 trillion in 20 years. They say, look, if the only problem a deficit spending can cause is inflation. So what you do is you look to the long-term inflation forecast, and they'll tell you if you have a deficit problem. Well, the long-term inflation forecasts are the CBO says 2%, the Fed says 2%, and your precious free market Treasury index bonds say something less than 2%. Okay, and I don't think 2% is an inflation problem. So what they're telling us is that even with today's budgets, even without making any adjustments at all, we're not going to have an inflation problem, which means somehow, so look, the burden of proof, if you think there's a deficit problem, the burden of proof is on you to show me there's an inflation problem. And so the burden of proof is on you to show me that the Fed, the CBO, and the free market is wrong with their inflation forecast. And if you can do that, fine, then I'll listen to you and take a look at whether or not we have a deficit problem. Okay, but he couldn't do that either. And so those were the two answers to any possible question on the public debt. It's just the dollars spent that haven't been used to pay taxes. It sits in accounts. What's the problem? And if there's, if there's no long-term deficit problem, even though the headline left, like Krugman and Reich, all these guys concede there's a headline deficit problem, they're wrong. The burden of proof is on them to show me that there's a long-term inflation problem, which means the Fed, the CBO, and the market is wrong. And until then, I don't see a long-term deficit problem. Anyway, they couldn't do that. And so we have what we have.
You see our latest.
We tried. It's not like we didn't try.
Do you see our latest comment I put up there?
No.
Okay, so we keep adding to the debt. Somebody didn't read their 7 deadlines.
Oh, okay. Oh, and so look, the public debt is the money supply, the important component of the money supply. It's the dollars spent by government that's held by somebody in the economy, and they're held in accounts at the Federal Reserve called securities accounts. Any other bank would call it a savings account. Instead, they call it government bonds. And so you've got this illusion that there's some kind of debt going on out there, that's some kind of problem. How are Treasury securities paid off? The Fed just shifts the dollars from securities accounts at the Fed to reserve accounts. They do that every month for like $50 billion or something when they come due. There are no grandchildren or taxpayers in the room when that happens. It's got nothing to do with it. Paying off the debt is simply a matter of debiting securities accounts and crediting reserve accounts at the Fed, shifting dollars from somebody's savings account to their checking account. If you have a savings account at the bank and it comes due, what do? They put it in your checking account. That's the same as the Federal Reserve Bank does. It's a bank. When the Treasury securities come due, they shift them from their savings account to the checking account. It's. Don't you think if there was a problem, it would have happened before 20 trillion, maybe 19 trillion or 1 trillion? Of course, it couldn't be a problem. I've been hearing this since I started. It's been 45 years. It's just complete nonsense. It's just Chicken Little.
What
And everybody in the Fed knows it. They all know it's just a reserve drain operation. They know it's not a funding operation. It's called a reserve drain inside the Fed.
You see, the general masses are petrified of the word debt. They think about their household checkbook. They have zero understanding of what it means to be the one that has the fingers to keystroke the dollars.
Yeah, it's a DE word, the deficit, the devil.
I swear on my life, if there was anything that anybody could get out of everything we just talked about, I mean, there's so much I want them to get, but one of the most important things I want them to get is, number one, anybody that talks about debt and deficit fears is not someone to be listened to. They literally are lying to you, or they're ignorant, and they still shouldn't be listened to. So really, seriously, if you hear that, I mean, they're not dealing in macroeconomic reality at all.
That's right. Yeah.